I have fond memories of coming home after a long day at sixth form in late 2005 and logging into Xbox Live, which was actually a novelty to me, having so long been a Nintendo and PlayStation fan and having only just bought a second-hand Xbox. It was in that relatively newfangled online service that I discovered what the future of video games was undeniably about to become. This was where I connected with other players online for the first time, and it was a window to another world I never could have imagined. So used to single-player experiences that were almost always introspective and shared only with anyone else who happened to be in the room. Truly, it was a seminal period in the industry. But I must recognise that there's a strange irony in this, considering that the first title I ever played online, experiencing the unbridled fun of online connectivity, actually had one of the most ambitious narrative openings in its single-player campaign that had ever been experimented with in gaming. It would take me almost a full decade to realise this, but 16 years now after its release, I cannot deny that the world-building prowess of Halo 2 is, in its first few hours, nothing short of a narrative masterstroke. Here's why. Let's set the scene. It's 2002 and you're the original developer of the Halo franchise, Bungie. Your first truly big game hit shelves late last year and you have become a worldwide phenomenon, for two reasons. People love your groundbreaking multiplayer elements, and to a more sedated but no less influential extent, you've created a sci-fi world with enough scope and intrigue that fans are frothing at the mouth to know more, and they want to know about everything. The history, the people, the politics, the lore. You have set an impressive, if not unprecedented, stage. But what about everything we haven't seen? Who are these evil aliens, and more importantly, what do they want? I mean, the artwork is amazing, the landscapes are pretty, and the way this purple testicle shoots exploding sticks of glass is pretty cool, but they're fighting us and we're fighting them, so what is this war actually about? Now, I could examine Combat Evolved and how Bungie even managed to tell a successful story without establishing hardly anything about the history of the Covenant, or how they think, or what they feel, or if they feel anything other than But the long and short of it is that Combat Evolved went for the ultimate in show don't tell, with the reasoning that I've considered to be that soldiers don't actually spend a lot of time sitting down and expositing about why they're at war. They strategize and they act, and that's all the Master Chief ever does, and that's why he's the goddamn Master Chief, right? But I think Bungie knew that despite the effective use of what might be considered a form of purposeful omission in focusing on the direct story elements in the first game, fans wanted more in the sequel. Not just more, but more in terms of the W's they'd most strongly omitted. The who and the why, not just the when, what and where. So as Bungie, what's the best thing that you can do in this case? Well, surely it's showcase in your opening scene an alien homeworld we've never seen, translate an alien tongue we've never understood, and show us a failed commanding officer stripped naked and ritualistically branded in front of a congregation of deluded and bloodthirsty religious zealots. Sounds about right to me, anyway. The dialogue in this scene, which is juxtaposed with scenes of the Chief at a ceremony of his own, is something very rare for video games in the mid-noughties. It is extremely crisp and expertly well delivered, in all the Arbiter's early exchanges. Now, plenty of games had decent dialogue before Halo 2, sure, but nothing ever really worth writing home about. Remember, we are talking about an industry that produced the ever-lauded line, "All your base are belong to us." I know that's bottom of the barrel, but just in case you forgot. We learn so much in these opening cinematics that we didn't even have an inkling of before, and I think that's what makes it so compelling. We see the so-called hierarchs, the Covenant holy leaders we didn't know about. We see the blind, religious fervour we had only ever heard Cortana speculate about in wonder. And perhaps what's most interesting is that in the first of their translated dialogue, we see in these aliens very human-like weaknesses. Anger, discord, shame. Nothing like this was ever explored in Combat Evolved. As an enemy, they were displayed as a force that was intimidating in its unified strength, so single-willed as to be as otherworldly as they literally were, but now, utilising the power of omniscient storytelling that the first game had eschewed, we see them for what they are, beings so humanly flawed that they are in fact all the more terrifying. What makes it even more compelling is the number of questions it raises that we must experience the rest of the story to fully understand. The Great Journey, what is that? Why is that so important to them? Who is this heretic the hierarchs fear, it seems more so even than the humans? And wait a minute, whoa. Whimpering like grunts at the teat? Grunts have breasts? I think if I had to boil it all down, I would say that what makes Halo 2's opening cinematics so brilliant are twofold. The first, and perhaps most commonly overlooked aspect, is that they were built to be exactly that, cinematic. I would be the first to admit that Hideo Kojima had achieved cinematic quality in gaming long before Bungie did, but their step up from Combat Evolved is notable indeed. The developers had said, we want our cinematics to feel like scenes from movies, and they do. That's why the narrative approach feels so clean, and lends it a power that the exquisite world building in the first game never had. Second is that it gives our antagonists, some of whom will not always be so, not only a face, but what is known in narrative nerd-wordery as agency. In the first game, they were just this enemy we were fighting, and they were really keen on this big ring thing called Halo, and we needed to find out why. That was about it. And the fact that the narrative worked in that bare-bones construction is a testament to how well the art direction, along with Cortana's monologues, were utilised to make the world of Halo feel real, even though the Covenant were never really given a voice. Agency is the narrative concept that characters have influence upon the story in which they are set. Now, one could argue that, hell, they had a lot of agency in Combat Evolved, because Cortana was constantly identifying what they were trying to do and how they were trying to do it, but I would counter that really they had very little agency, if any at all, because of the simple question I ask myself: how can you have agency if you never speak? Halo 2's early cinematics are compelling because the first words we hear the Covenant say are so powerful in defining who and what they are in a way we've never even seen. As fans of the series, the first words we understand from them have become iconic.
When you first saw Halo, were you blinded by its majesty?
Blinded?
Paralyzed? Dumbstruck?
And
soon the great journey shall begin. But when it does, the weight of your heresy will stay your feet, and you shall be left behind.
as well as
What of the Council?
The tasks you must undertake as the Arbiter are perilous, suicidal. You will die, as each Arbiter has before you. The Council will have their corpse.
Now, of course, it would be foolish of me to ignore the fact that one of the aspects that makes this opening compelling is also that, being a fan of it, I know its ultimate value. Its introduction of Thel 'Vidam as the Arbiter is a seminal moment in the series because he is one of the few characters in the franchise that actually has an arc. He is a zealous leader, who in failing to protect what we now know as Installation 04, becomes disgraced, takes on the mantle of the Arbiter, and, realizing the errors of the hierarchs he had devoted his life to, turns his back on what he had sworn to uphold, the Covenant itself. Halo 2 as a narrative is starkly different to what Combat Evolved originally brought to the table. The first game had the staunch narrative ethos of, "This is the world you're in, soldier, grab a gun," whereas its equally well-received sequel was determined, and bravely I must admit, to not ride upon the coattails of the first game's success. It was designed to be bigger, better, smoother, and, in terms of the campaign's narrative at least, distinctly different. To be honest, I wouldn't even go so far as to say that the Arbiter's inclusion in the game is necessarily bold. Something of that ilk was essential to make the Covenant really feel a part of the story this time, and not simply the voiceless antagonists, which, narratively speaking, was not so much a failure in the first game as a notable omission. That's just how well presented the rest of the story was. I want to note also that in playing the Master Chief Collection recently, I was reminded of a particular scene in the build-up to the start of the mining facility raid, where the player first plays as the Arbiter. One of the elite commanders says,
"You are the Arbiter, the will of the prophets. But these are my elites. Their lives matter to me, yours does not."
Which strikes me again as an oddly human comment to make. Nowhere in the first game would this have been relevant, appropriate, or have any credence, and yet, in the sequel, it serves the narrative exactly as it should. To depict the Covenant as not mere voiceless antagonists, but enemies more human than we would perhaps instinctively want to admit. And this subversion of expectations, as has become a popular phrase in narrative analysis, particularly since the release of The Last Jedi, you can bet your butt I'm making a video on that little debacle one day, is undeniably a part of what has made Halo lore the treasure trove that it is today. Nuance is what allows conflict to breathe. It extends its life, and gives it the motion and propulsion to become more than what it was. And, as we know, conflict is the lifeblood of almost any great story. And so the narrative thread upon which the successful first story was built was, in its much anticipated sequel, turned completely on its head, and is cemented in the minds of the fandom at one particular moment, when the armour that would rival that of the Master Chief's Mjolnir armour is donned, and the wearer asks,
"What would you have your Arbiter do?"